The grid was always built to be bigger, stronger, a very robust, reliable system. And as you know, politicians are energy blind. They really don't see what's going on and what the grid is and how it affects the things that we do on an everyday basis. So the oil embargo had a big impact, of course, on pricing, and it shifted what we're looking at as far as fuel sources go. Some say that 50% of the population would die within 60 days of having no power. Welcome to the Standby Generator Podcast, brought to you by Power Alliance. I'm your host, Jim Swetman. Together, we will dive into the world of the standby power business, offering expert insights, industry trends, and actionable strategies to help you grow and scale your generator business. Whether you're looking to optimize your operations, increase profitability, or stay ahead of the curve, this podcast is your go-to resource. So grab a seat and let's power up your business for success. Hello, and thank you for joining this week's Standby Generator Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Swetman, and this week we're going to be talking about the national power grid. We're going to deep dive into this and see exactly what is it, what's going on with it, and how come you as a standby power dealer are selling a boatload of generators and there's actually a standby power business. And you're in business because the grid is basically falling apart. And let's deep dive into this and find out exactly why this has happened and what's some of the history. How did this all happen and where are things going? So hold on to your hat. Let's rock and roll and see how this thing rolls. First thing, let's talk about what is the grid. The grid, the way that I see it, is broken up into basically three parts. Remember, the grid was always built to be bigger, stronger, a very robust, reliable system. World War II really saw the big upbuild of the grid to help support the war effort during World War II. That's really when it was built, the engineering and design was built, and it was built to be a very robust and reliable system. Well, what's happened to it? First, let's talk about what is the grid. Like I said, three parts the way I see it. One is the physical side of the grid. Of course, you have the power generating plants, transmission and distribution of the power to get to your home or business using hundreds of utilities to make that happen, whether they're coal, nuclear, natural gas, hydro, wind energy, they're all out there. And there's three interconnections in the United States. One, of course, is the Western, the second is the Eastern, and then you have the Texas or ERCOT. They have their own interconnection system there. You can also throw in Quebec on that as well as the North American part of it. Quebec has their own power grid system too, which, by the way, is mostly nuclear as far as what they do. So that, to me, is the first part of what the grid really is. It's the physical part. The second part of it is the policy part. Policies, of course, are the rules and regulations and the codes for the grid. And those are overseen by two basic organizations, big organization, FERC and NERC. That's the Federal Electrical Regulatory Commission, and the NERC, which is really the national part of the organizations. And they oversee the functionality of the grid on the federal and national level. And that's the policy side of it. The other part, which we can't ignore, is the political part of the grid. And as you know, politicians are energy blind. They really don't see what's going on and what the grid is and how it affects the things that we do on an everyday basis. So we'll get into politics here a little bit, but I just want to talk about what I think are the three parts of the grid, and we're going to dig into each one of these things. The next thing I want to talk about is what the hell happened? What happened to the grid? What caused the grid to be an issue over the last 30 or 40 or 50 years? Well, I think it all started, again, this is me personally, looking at some of the statistics that are out there. Back in 1973 was the oil embargo. And the oil embargo was the reliance. We had a huge reliance on oil for electricity generation. In the 70s, many power plants used oil as a primary fuel source to generate electricity, especially in regions with limited access to coal or natural gas. So the oil embargo had a big impact, of course, on pricing, and it shifted what we're looking at as far as fuel sources go. So we started to look at alternative fuel sources like coal and nuclear power to generate, so we didn't have to rely on our friends, the Arabs over there, on what we were doing. And also energy conservation and efficiency efforts started during the oil embargo. So that was kind of the first thing that kind of shook things up with the power grid. In 1992, deregulation was implemented across the United States. And the passage, that was the National Energy Policy Act of 1992. And in 96, it really started. FERC issued some orders requiring utilities to open their transmission lines for others, both generators and wholesalers and power purchasers, for reasonable rates. In 1999 and 2000, established the Regional Transmission Organization. So now we have deregulation steps in and starts breaking apart the integrated systems that were in place. Obviously, the pros and cons of deregulation: consumer choice, competitive pricing, innovative and enhanced services. But of course, the cons of this whole thing were impact on infrastructure. It all came down to pricing over reliability. Going with that same thing with deregulation, probably one of the biggest companies that was involved in ruining the national power grid was Enron. Enron started in 1985 and they went bankrupt in 2001, and they were an energy trader. If you older guys remember Enron and what an absolute catastrophe that was to the free market trader. Enron restricted supplies by taking plants offline to manipulate energy markets. They had about 10 or 15 sub-companies that were borrowing against each other, and it was an absolute disaster to the energy markets, and all came with Enron. So the oil embargo, deregulation, Enron, and the last thing here that has caused destabilization in the grid is wind and solar. It has caused less reliability, bidding into the grid at negative pricing, and federal regulations into the wind and solar market has caused big instability with the power grid. This episode of the Standby Generator Podcast is proudly presented by Power Alliance, the only mastermind community built specifically for standby generator dealers. At Power Alliance, we believe growth happens faster when you're connected. That's why we bring together like-minded dealers across the country to share real-world insights, solve challenges, and accelerate business success together. From streamlining operations to scaling your service division, Power Alliance gives you the tools, support, and community to take your business to the next level. Learn more and join the movement at www.poweralliance.com. What else happened with the grid? Well, politics. Politics are a big deal about what's happened. As I mentioned before, politicians are energy blind. Jim, what exactly does that mean? Why are politicians so arrogant when it comes to the grid? Well, a lot of it has to do with their renewables. They've been caught up in politics for a very, very long time. Renewables, it's kind of a culture icon showing this mythical path to the Garden of Eden. Seen as the savior to save the planet, but that doesn't work because when the sun's not shining or the wind isn't blowing, it just causes this green delusion that everything is going to happen and that the renewables are going to save the energy market, that we need to get rid of coal and natural gas and other things. Now, it has played a part in some areas. It is working, but there's a huge part. So you'll look back at, okay, what's going on with the renewables? Well, the renewables and the political part of the renewables, a huge transfer of capital to the renewables instead of the infrastructure of the grid. Billions and billions of dollars were then redirected into renewables instead of taking a look at rebuilding and reinforcing the grid. And unfortunately, with all the tax credits and subsidies, it has forced the market on the renewables. It's very easy to see. And again, this is just all stuff that you can talk about all day long, but it's very simple, is that electrical costs have tripled since the renewable culture started 20 plus years ago. Look at Europe and how they rely on Russian oil now to survive. They were a big part of the renewables, and now they're stuck as far as what they do. Is government mandated policies have caused huge problems with the grid, and it's undeniable about where we are and what's going on right now. Also, part of the politics is obviously the closing of nuclear and coal plants. We've lost our baseline power. The power plants that have always given us stability over the last 20 years because of politics and green energy have closed, or they're scheduled to close, or a baseline power has caused instability in the grid. There have been no new nuclear plants built since 2013, and that was in Texas. In Georgia, they did expand an existing nuclear plant in 1996, but Texas obviously needing power was the last time a nuclear plant was built was in 2013. So obviously, all these things put together, everything that we talked about has caused the instability, and it's happened over a 30-year period. So there's not one thing that has caused the grid to have problems. There has been a whole lot of issues. The perfect example of how critical the grid is and how vulnerable the grid is the Texas Winter Storm Uri in February of 2021. It was an ice storm in Texas. You probably remember that, and you dealers down in Texas obviously lived through it. Well, 80% of the state, or 26 million people, lost power 2 or 3 different times during that outage. They contribute 2 to 900 people died because of carbon monoxide, accidents that happen, and of course, access to health care. Without power, modern society collapses. Some say that 50% of the population would die within 60 days of having no power. Now, you can take a look at that and think about that for a second. But if we have no power and we are not prepared, most people are not prepared to have power, that you would lose 50% of the population. You can question that, but it certainly makes you think about what happened. What happened in Texas? Again, you can look at some different things. There was an over reliance of renewables. Secondly, was over reliance on natural gas. Natural gas was always that stability side of it. And when they lost the grid completely and the renewables, they were relying on natural gas to run the plants that were secondary. And that was an issue. They say, too, the other big issue of what happened in Texas was relying on neighboring power supplies that never shared power. The just-in-time responses were just not there. Obviously, that has been looked at. There are changes that are being made on that, but we need to take a look at what happens when the grid goes down in a very big way, and you take a look at what happened in Texas in 2021. Another thing we need to think about with the national power grid, as we talk about it here, is grid vulnerability. How vulnerable is the grid right now to attacks? I think the first thing is we talk about cyber attacks. The grid has become a lot of online controls, which makes it vulnerable. The interconnects working with each other. So cyber attacks are the number one when you talk about grid vulnerability. Next thing you talk about is physical attacks, substations, transformers, and control facilities are often located in remote areas with limited surveillance. You take a look at the substations that are sitting out there. It doesn't take much to take down a substation, and you've read about some of this vandalism and sabotage and malicious attacks on the physical side of things. Again, going back to cyber attacks, the increasing reliance on automated systems and digital technologies, the SCADA systems, those are all grid-induced vulnerabilities that are out there. Of course, the natural disasters, extreme weather events such as hurricanes, floods, storms, wildfires, of course, they can damage the infrastructure and have cascading failures that are going out there. And what we're talking about, too, is the aging infrastructure. Significant portion of the grid's components are nearing the end or way past its lifespans. Of course, increasing the risk of equipment failures, making it more susceptible to damage and everything like that. And then, I mean, it's just a mess, of course. What is the consequences of all this, of the grid failures, right? Public safety risk, economics, national security concerns, society disruptions, all of this all fall into grid vulnerabilities. And, what is NERC and FERC trying to do with this? Of course, infrastructure hardening, right? Reinforcing physical components, advanced cybersecurity, of course, are trying to take care of that. Grid modernization and grid technologies are all, everything trying to happen with that. But those are the vulnerabilities that we're dealing with every day. So if you're a standby power dealer out there, there is a lot of vulnerabilities to this grid. There is a lot of upside to the standby power business. And it's been pretty quiet. My personal thing is the way that I look at this thing. It's been pretty quiet out there over the years as far as grid stability. But it looks like hopefully it remains that way. But boy, oh boy, it doesn't take much to take this grid down. Okay, so where are we headed? Where are we headed with the grid? What's going on? How can we make it better for you, me, the family, the businesses, and the United States? Well, there is significant investment being made. There's billions of dollars being invested in federal and state levels to build additional high voltage lines. The Trans-West Express, there's something going on there. And so you can take a look at what's being done. The modernization of the grid, interregional transmission, increasing the ability to move power across different regions of the country, policy support, the Federal Emergency Regulation Commission, remember FERC, they're implementing rules, they're trying to make changes, they're trying to make things as best as they can, but this is going to take a long time. That's why the new administration that has checked in, they are making changes to policies. And we all talked about the AI race, building these AI data centers. The administration now has authorized on-plant nuke plants to be built to support these facilities and all the regulations that could never have happened before, that are now local power plants, whether they're natural gas, whether there's geothermal, whether there's nuke, to provide power, because there's no way the grid can supply 6, 7, 10 megawatts, or even talking about 100 megawatt AI centers that are going to need power to support the AI race. And believe me, the current administration wants to win the AI race, and that means power. And there's going to be a lot of modeling that has to happen with these AI centers, with the utilities. The utilities are not going to bring them online. The utilities are still going to be involved unless their modeling works, because these data centers will not come online and utilities will not provide power to them unless they have a good working system, backup systems, UPS systems, and other systems online, and their own microgrids are going to have to happen with these AI data centers that are going to do. So you've got some administrative changes. You're going to see new nuke plants being built. Finally, with the technology changes, you're not going to see these old big nuke plants. You're going to see the acceleration of nuke plants. Even here in New York State, finally, Hochul is stepping up and saying they want to build some nuke plants to develop. So you're going to see fast tracking of that coming along. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. But in the meantime, it is a very vulnerable system out there. And again, as a standby power dealer, you're going to see instability in the grid, which is unfortunately and fortunately good for business, but bad for people out there. So again, I'm Jim Swetman from Power Alliance. I just wanted to chat about the grid. Where is it? How did it get vulnerable? What's involved? And where are we going with everything? And I think it's important that you, as a standby power dealer owner, CEO of a company, really understand why we're in this mess and what does the future look like. So hopefully everything will look good. Again, I'm Jim Swetman from Power Alliance. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you for tuning in to the Standby Generator Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share. For more resources, tips, and to connect with other like-minded professionals, visit us at poweralliance.com or visit our social media pages. Until next time, keep powering up your business.